To unpack this call to curiosity is to pry open a hidden layer of Star Wars lore. One where the Nightsisters of Dathomir aren't just a footnote in the story of Force wielders, but silent architects of galactic upheaval. You think you know them? A tribe of dark sorceresses, bound to their jungle home, dabbling in spells that feel outside the Jedi-Sith binary. But what if that's exactly what they wanted you to think? The Nightsisters didn't just exist alongside galactic history, they shaped it, weaving their influence into the Clone Wars, the fall of the Republic, and even the rise of empires, all while staying just out of the light. This isn't just about uncovering their secrets. It's about realizing how much of the galaxy's big moments weren't accidents, and how a group you dismissed as obscure held the strings all along. Let's dig into why their dark influence runs deeper than you ever imagined, and how it redefines everything you thought you knew about Star Wars' most pivotal conflicts. First, we need to unlearn the myth. The Nightsisters weren't just Force wielders. Their power was a hybrid of raw Force sensitivity and Dathomir's ancient, primal sorcery, a combination that made them uniquely suited to operate in the shadows. Unlike the Jedi, who clung to balance and service, or the Sith, who craved throne rooms and grand declarations of power, the Nightsisters saw influence as a game of subtlety. Their magic didn't rely on lightsabers or Force lightning, though they could wield both. It relied on control of minds, of events, of even the fabric of life itself. Take their ability to bind spirits to physical forms, or to grow Force-sensitive flora that could poison or persuade, or to manipulate the emotions of others without leaving a trace. These weren't party tricks. They were tools of manipulation. A Nightsister didn't need to storm a Senate chamber to change a vote. She could slip a vial of enchanted pollen into a senator's drink, softening their resolve to oppose a war. She didn't need to lead an army to weaken a faction. She could whisper a spell into a general's ear, making him second-guess his strategy mid-battle. This is why their influence stayed hidden for centuries. It wasn't loud. It was intimate, woven into the small, crucial moments that tip the scales of history, moments no one thinks to question until it's too late. The Jedi dismissed them as primitive because their magic didn't fit the Order's rigid rules. The Sith underestimated them because they didn't crave the same throne. But the Nightsisters didn't care about recognition. They cared about outcome. And for centuries, their outcome shaped the galaxy in ways no one saw coming. Now, let's turn to the Clone Wars, the conflict you thought was just a Sith plot to destroy the Jedi, but which the Nightsisters turned into a laboratory for their own power. You remember Count Dooku, the Sith Lord leading the Separatists. His alliance with Mother Talzin, the Nightsisters' leader, wasn't just a convenience, it was a partnership. And Talzin wasn't the one taking orders. Dooku needed the Nightsisters' magic to strengthen his army. They crafted enchanted weapons for his droids, trained his commandos in stealth magic, and even helped him create the Jedi warrior, Grievous, yes, that Grievous, by infusing his cyborg body with Force energy to make him deadlier. But Talzin had her own agenda. She didn't want the Separatists to win the war. She wanted the war to last. A prolonged conflict would bleed the Republic dry, weaken the Jedi, who were already stretched thin across battlefronts, and create a power vacuum that the Nightsisters could step into. Think about it. Every time the Separatists seemed on the brink of defeat, a Nightsister spell would turn the tide. Maybe a fog that blinded Jedi starfighters, or a mind trick that made a Republic general order a disastrous retreat. Every time the Republic gained ground, the Nightsisters would sabotage their supply lines, not with droids, but with cursed cargo that rotted or exploded at the worst possible moment. They weren't picking sides, they were stoking the fire. And the fire worked. The Clone Wars dragged on for years, turning the galaxy against the Jedi, who were seen as warmongers, and making the Republic so desperate for order that it would eventually welcome Palpatine's empire. The Sith got the empire they wanted, but they owed part of that victory to the Nightsisters, who kept the war alive long enough for Palpatine to seize power. You think the Clone Wars were a Sith master plan? It was a collaboration, and the Nightsisters were the silent partners who made sure it didn't fall apart. But their influence didn't stop with the Clone Wars. The Nightsisters laid the groundwork for galactic empires centuries before Palpatine ever put on a crown. How? By weaponizing knowledge and keeping it secret. Dathomir's archives weren't just filled with spells. They were filled with histories of how to manipulate republics into becoming empires, of how to turn fear into loyalty, of how to weaken institutions like the Jedi Order from the inside. For generations, the Nightsisters traded this knowledge to powerful factions, aristocratic families, crime syndicates, even early Sith lords, in exchange for resources, protection, and favors. A noble house, wanting to expand its power, the Nightsisters gave them a spell to make their rivals seem corrupt. A Sith Lord wanting to overthrow his master? The Nightsisters taught him how to hide his ambition using Force illusion. These weren't random acts. They were part of a long game. The Nightsisters knew that empires rise when chaos and fear make people crave control, and they spent centuries sowing that chaos. They helped topple small republics on the galaxy's edge just to study how power shifts. They manipulated trade routes to create scarcity, making populations dependent on strong leaders. They even planted rumors about external threats, fake pirate fleets, imaginary force cults to make planets surrender their autonomy to larger, more protective powers. By the time the Republic started to crumble, the galaxy was already primed for an empire. It had been primed by the Nightsisters. Palpatine didn't invent the idea of galactic dominance. He stepped into a role the Nightsisters had been preparing for centuries. And while he eventually turned on them, fearful of their power, their work was done. The empire was built on the foundation they'd laid. Here's the kicker. The Nightsisters' influence is still hidden because they wanted it that way. They didn't leave monuments or holocrons bragging about their deeds. They left ripples, a senator's sudden change of heart, a battle that ended too conveniently, an empire that rose just when the galaxy was ready for it. You think you know Dathomir? You think you know the Clone Wars? You've been seeing the surface. The real story is in the gaps, in the moments where things just happened and no one asked why. Why did Grievous become so obsessed with hunting Jedi? Because the Nightsisters' magic amplified his rage. Why did the Clone Wars last as long as they did? Because the Nightsisters kept both sides from winning too soon. Why did the galaxy accept the Empire so quickly? Because the Nightsisters had spent centuries teaching people to fear chaos more than tyranny. This isn't just about uncovering a secret group of sorceresses. It's about rethinking Star Wars itself. The galaxy's biggest conflicts aren't just between light and dark. They're between the forces we see and the forces we don't. The Nightsisters remind us that history is written by the winners, but the winners often don't know who's pulling their strings. You think the Nightsisters are gone? Maybe. But their influence lingers in the way empires rise, in the way conflicts drag on, in the way even the brightest heroes can be manipulated without ever knowing it. So the next time you watch the Clone Wars or see the Empire's flags rise, ask yourself, what if none of this was an accident? What if there was a group of dark sorceresses on a jungle planet, smiling to themselves as the galaxy did exactly what they'd planned? The truth is more shocking than you think, and it's been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop assuming they know the story and start asking why. That's the power of the Nightsisters. They didn't just shape the galaxy, they made you forget they ever did. And now that you're curious, now that you're asking questions, that's when the real story begins. Most people think of Dathomir as just Maul's home, a backwater swamp in the Outer Rim, a footnote in Sith lore, a place the galaxy forgets as soon as it's mentioned. But what if I told you that beneath those mist-choked trees, in caves glowing with bioluminescent fungi, there existed a coven of witches who didn't just survive the dark side, they mastered it, bending it into something no Jedi or Sith could ever comprehend. What if I told you these women pulled strings across star systems, shaping wars, manipulating destinies, and leaving their mark on the galaxy's most pivotal moments, all while the rest of the universe dismissed them as savages in the muck? You know their name, if you know it at all, the Nightsisters. And they were never just a cult. They were a force of nature, sharp, unyielding, and terrifyingly capable. The Jedi called them heretics of the Force. The Sith saw them as a curiosity, a sideshow of primitive magic. But both were wrong. The Nightsisters didn't wield the Force like either order. They didn't cling to the Sith's rage or the Jedi's denial of emotion. They merged the dark side with Dathomir's primal, living energy. The same energy that gave life to rancors, that made the swamp itself feel alive with intent. They called it magick, and it was raw, visceral, and unapologetically feminine. A Nightsister could summon a storm with a whisper, heal a mortal wound with a potion brewed from swamp moss and dragon's blood, or curse a foe to be hunted by their own shadows. They fought with poisoned darts dipped in venom that numbed the Force, with blades carved from rancor bone that hummed with dark energy, and with tactics that turned the jungle into a death trap for anyone foolish enough to invade. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy, discipline. A matriarchy built on power, loyalty, and the unshakable belief that Dathomir and its daughters deserved to rule the shadows. And rule they did. Their reach wasn't just confined to their swamp. It stretched across the galaxy, touching everything from small-scale skirmishes to the Clone Wars themselves. Let's start with the Sith. Their most unlikely, and most dangerous pawns. Darth Sidious knew of the Nightsisters, of course. He felt their magic in the Force, a cold, thrumming current that didn't fit his neat little game of Jedi versus Sith. He sent Maul back to Dathomir, not just to reclaim his heritage, but to destroy them. But Maul was never a match for the Coven. The Nightsisters didn't fear him, they toyed with him. They showed him visions of his mother, of the boy he'd been before Sidious forged him into a weapon, and in that vulnerability, they planted a seed of doubt that would plague him for years. Maul left Dathomir broken, his mission failed, and Sidious was forced to turn his attention elsewhere, buying the Nightsisters time to expand their influence. Then there's Ahsoka Ventress. You know her as Dooku's former apprentice, a Sith assassin with a vendetta. But what you might not know is that she was a Nightsister sent to Dooku by Mother Talzin herself, not as a loyal student, but as a spy. Ventress learned Dooku's weaknesses, his plans, his greed, and fed every detail back to Dathomir. She sabotaged separatist operations from the inside, leaking battle plans to Republic forces when it suited the Coven, eliminating rivals who threatened Dathomir's interests, and even planting ideas in Dooku's head that led him to make catastrophic mistakes. When Dooku finally saw through her charade and tried to kill her, Ventress fled back to her sisters, not as a failure, but as a weapon that had served its purpose. And the Nightsisters didn't just protect her. They armed her. They gave her the tools to hunt Dooku, to make him pay for betraying one of their own. That's the Nightsisters' power. They didn't just use people, they empowered them, turning pawns into weapons that struck when the galaxy least expected it. But their influence didn't stop with the Sith. The Clone Wars were their playground. While Jedi and Separatists clashed in open battle, the Nightsisters were harvesting rare resources from war-torn planets. Kyber shards that amplified their magic, toxic spores that could disable droids, and Force-sensitive children orphaned by the fighting, whom they took back to Dathomir to train as new sisters. They struck deals with Hutt cartels, trading their potions and curses for information and starships. They manipulated senators on Coruscant, planting whispers of doubt about the war effort that slowed Republic legislation. They even turned separatist droids against their own armies, using magic to override their programming and turn battlefields into slaughterhouses for the CIS. And no one knew. The Republic called the chaos random insurgent attacks. The Separatists blamed Jedi sabotage. No one dared to imagine that a group of witches from a forgotten planet was pulling the strings. Because to admit that would mean admitting that the galaxy's two greatest powers were being outmaneuvered by a force they couldn't understand or control. Even the Jedi, for all their supposed wisdom, were blind to the Nightsisters' game. When a Republic battalion was sent to Dathomir to secure the system during the Clone Wars, the Nightsisters wiped them out in hours. Vines coiled around troopers' throats before they could fire their blasters. Quicksand swallowed tanks whole. Magic turned their own blaster bolts back on them. The few survivors who made it off-world spoke of monsters in the mist, of witchcraft that defied the Force. But the Jedi Council dismissed their stories as trauma-induced delusions. They couldn't accept that a group of Force users outside their order, one that embraced the dark side without succumbing to Sith madness, could defeat their best troops. So they filed the incident away as a local uprising and moved on. That was the Nightsisters' greatest strength, invisibility. They didn't crave fame or glory. They didn't want to rule the galaxy openly. They wanted to control it from the shadows, ensuring that no one ever threatened Dathomir again, because they'd been threatened before. Long before Maul, long before the Clone Wars, the Jedi had come to Dathomir. They'd called the Nightsisters corruptors, abominations, and tried to wipe them out. But the witches fought back, using the swamp as their ally, turning the Jedi's own code against them. The Jedi left bloodied and humiliated, and the Nightsisters learned a brutal lesson. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the only way to survive was to be the ones holding the power. So they built their coven into a fortress. They trained their daughters to be warriors and strategists. They wove their magic into the very soil of Dathomir, making the planet itself a weapon. And when the galaxy went to war, they didn't pick sides, they picked winners. They made sure that no matter who triumphed, Dathomir would emerge stronger. You might be wondering, if they were so powerful, why did they fade into obscurity? Why don't we hear more about them in the annals of Star Wars history? Because power like theirs doesn't last forever. Not when the galaxy's most ruthless players decide to eliminate the threat. After Ventress's betrayal, Dooku grew paranoid. He feared the Nightsisters' influence, feared that they'd turn on him again, or worse, align with Sidious. So he sent his most loyal general, General Grievous, to Dathomir with a fleet of droids, ordered to erase the coven from existence. It was a slaughter. The Nightsisters fought fiercely, summoning storms, raising the dead to fight as zombies, and tearing through droids with their magic. But Grievous's forces were too many, too relentless. Mother Talzin, the coven's leader, sacrificed herself to save a handful of sisters, using her last breath to curse Dooku and Grievous. By the end of the battle, Dathomir was in ruins, the Nightsisters all but extinct. But here's the thing about the Nightsisters, they don't stay dead easily. Their magic is tied to Dathomir, to the swamp, to the very essence of the dark side. Even after their coven was destroyed, their influence lingered. Maul, broken and adrift, carried their legacy with him, his rage fueled by the loss of his home, his tactics shaped by the witches who once toyed with him. Ventress, the last of the full-fledged Nightsisters, continued to hunt Dooku, carrying their vendetta until her dying day. And rumors persist, rumors that a new generation of Nightsisters has risen from Dathomir's ashes, that they're rebuilding their coven, that they're waiting for the right moment to re-emerge and claim what's theirs. Because the galaxy forgot about them. It dismissed Dathomir as a backwater, Maul's forgotten home, a place of monsters and mist. But the Nightsisters never forgot. They never forgive. And power that's hidden isn't power that's gone, it's power that's waiting for the galaxy to grow complacent, waiting for the next war, waiting to pull the strings again. So the next time you hear someone mention Dathomir, don't think of Maul. Think of the witches. Think of the magic. Think of the force that shaped galactic history without anyone noticing. Think of the Nightsisters and wonder if they're still out there, in the shadows, biding their time. Because the galaxy's greatest threats aren't the Sith Lords or the Jedi Masters. They're the ones no one sees. The ones who pull the strings. The ones who turn swamps into fortresses and magic into weapons. The Nightsisters. And they're not done yet. Not by a long shot.